Well, a man is going to prison accused of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from coin cashing machines. Today, a federal judge sentenced 34-year-old Richard Pena to 4 years in federal prison, 3 years in supervised release, and to pay $582,000 in restitution. Court documents say starting in January of 2021 until his arrest in December of that year in Clark County, Pena was involved in a scheme to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in change from coin cashing machines located in grocery stores in multiple states. Pena, they say, disguised himself as an employee of a coin cashing company, acted like he was serving the location's machines, only to break into it and then walk out with the coin vault. An alert employee at a Vancouver grocery store saw Pena and alerted police.